The story kicks off at an abandoned construction site in the dead of night, where a boy named Zhong Zong is cornered by a group of sinister people armed with dangerous weapons. Suspended above a cage packed with ravenous zombies, the tension builds as the undead eagerly await their chance to devour him. A woman's voice cuts through the tense air, taunting the boy. She asks if life feels meaningless to him now that all his friends are dead. As her words sink in, cold sweat begins to drip down his face, reflecting the fear and helplessness gripping him. Yong's thoughts flash back to the good times he once had with his friends, filling him with regret. "It's all my fault you ended up like this," he mutters to himself, the weight of guilt pressing down on him. Overcome by sorrow and anger, he snaps, turning his rage on the evil woman. "You deserve a miserable death," he shouts. "How could someone do something so horrible to their own kind?" His voice shakes with both fury and disbelief, unable to comprehend her cruelty. The evil woman, her face twisted with satisfaction, clings to a man of high authority. With a smug grin, she remarks, "Yong is angry at me again." Amused, the man beside her glances at Yong and suggests, "Why not torture him slowly? Let it help you release your anger at his foul mouth." His tone is cold, as if Yong's suffering is nothing more than a casual suggestion. The man smirks at Yong, thanking him for the supplies that will keep them comfortably fed for a few more months. As he speaks, he clicks a button, causing Yong to drop with a jarring thud into the cage full of zombies. The sudden noise immediately rouses the zombies, who start to stir, their hunger and aggression focused on the new arrival. The starving zombies rush at Yong with frenzied speed, and as they reach him, they begin to tear into him, devouring him alive. Yong coughs up blood, the pain overwhelming. As he endures the horrific agony, he thinks to himself that if he were given another chance at life, he would seize it with purpose. He vows to make those responsible for his suffering and the deaths of his friends pay dearly. Yong promises himself that he will never again face such torment and loss. Yong jolts awake, his mind reeling from the traumatic experience he just endured. To his shock, he finds himself face to face with the same evil woman who betrayed him in his previous life. As she screams at him about not including her name on the house deed, Yong struggles to understand his current predicament. He had just thought he was dead a moment ago. As he looks around, a thought dawns on him. Could it be that he's been reborn before the apocalypse? Perhaps he's been given a chance to redo his life with a second chance to change his fate. Yong reflects on his past life, revealing that he was deceived by Qi Jing. She had stolen the inheritance left by his parents, leaving him homeless and forced to sleep on the streets in harsh weather. As a global catastrophe struck, turning most people into zombies and plunging the world into chaos, Yong managed to survive with the help of friends. Together, they built a safe zone to endure the apocalypse until it was safe to venture out again. Tragically, Qi Jing had pretended to be a desperate soul seeking refuge, only to betray him. She had let the enemy in, leading to the downfall of Zhong and his friends. Back in his house in the present time, Qi Jing is shouting at Zhong, demanding 400,000 yuan with no room for negotiation. Zhong, maintaining a serious expression, remains silent and simply looks at her. Her frustration grows, and she demands to know if he's heard her. Yong, though seething inside, knows he must stay calm and wait for the right moment to act. Qi Jing declares that she'll give him a week to come up with the money, but Yong interrupts her, curtly agreeing and insisting that she needs to leave. As he pushes her towards the door, Qi Jing is taken aback. She wonders to herself when Zhong became so assertive, reflecting on how he used to be her lackey. Zhong closes the door behind Qi Jing and turns to face the room. Glancing at the clock, he realizes he has only a month to prepare for the impending apocalypse. Determined not to repeat the mistakes of his past life, he knows he must act swiftly. Suddenly, a system alert appears, signaling that the apocalypse system is now active. Along with the alert, several system missions are displayed, including one that offers 10 points for owning a piece of land and a year's worth of supplies. Yong's eyes widen in shock as he processes the new reality and the opportunities it presents for preparation. Yong, surprised, asks what the system points can be used for once he completes a mission and how he can utilize them. He discovers that there is a system store where he can purchase various items with the points earned from mission rewards. Reflecting on his past life, Yong remembers how he saved every penny he could to pay for the evil woman's bride price, which left him malnourished. Yong picks up his phone and receives a message asking, "Are you full?" He thinks to himself that with zombies expected to be everywhere in a month, he should enjoy good food while he can. The scene shifts to an upscale building where Zhang finds an array of gourmet food laid out. As he examines a dish, he wonders if it's the legendary Michelin 3-star takeaway. Curious about the taste of the 300 yuan braised pork, he takes a bite. His face lights up with happiness as he exclaims that the food is unbelievably delicious. He savors the meal with great enjoyment, but his delight is interrupted by a message on his phone. To his surprise, it's a call from a friend of the evil woman. Yang, seeing the name on the phone, sighs, wondering if that manipulative woman cried to her friend again. The friend, clearly upset, chastises Zhang for how he treated Qi Jing. She insists that Qi Jing only wanted him to prove his love by providing property, claiming that if he can't do that, he doesn't truly love her, a notion Zhang finds absurd. She explains that Qi Jing was merely testing him and that he failed miserably. However, if Zhang can come up with 1 million yuan in cash by the end of the day, the friend might help him win Qi Jing back. Fuming, Zhang retorts, "Who do you think you are testing me like that? Just get lost." Before the friend can respond, Zhang hangs up. Reclining on the couch, Yang ponders his next move. He decides he will build the strongest fortress on this land, one that no one would dare approach. His plan includes not only fortifying defenses, but also situating the fortress near a water source and a forest, ensuring a steady supply of resources. The scene shifts to a bustling hall filled with people moving about. The main character, MC, is greeted by a woman who inquires about what he's looking for. Before the MC can respond, a man intervenes. It becomes clear that he is the real estate manager of the place. The real estate manager instructs the woman to assist others in moving boxes in the back, mentioning that they have a large amount of toilet paper to handle. The woman attempts to reply but is cut off. The manager, with a stern tone, reminds her of who trained her in this field and angrily orders her to the back to help. Turning his attention to the MC, the manager sneers, disparaging him as a broke loser in cheap clothes who can't afford even a toilet, let alone a house. The MC's expression darkens with anger. He confronts the manager, asking if he is merely looking down on people or if he is just inherently evil. The real estate manager scoffs at the main character, declaring that he looks down on dogs like him. He further taunts, saying that if the main character could afford a toilet, he would live stream himself eating shit. Yang, unfazed by the real estate manager's mockery, retorts with a sly smile, "I'll make sure to find some fresh, hot, steaming ones for you to eat on stream later." He then turns back to business, confidently informing the lady worker that he isn't there to buy a house, he's there to buy land for himself. The real estate manager and the lady worker are stunned, their disbelief clear as they watch Zhang pull out a sleek black pay card. Cold sweat drips down their faces as the entire building falls silent in shock. Customers around him start murmuring, asking aloud what Yang means by buying land, and if he even realizes how much that would cost. One customer, baffled, exclaims that they've never seen someone purchase land so effortlessly, concluding that Yang must be incredibly wealthy to afford such an expensive piece of property. The lady worker, still in disbelief, politely asks Yang to follow her so she can give him the best and most detailed introduction available. As they walk away, the real estate manager, visibly annoyed, mutters that everyone knows how to brag, but doubts Yang can actually afford such expensive land. Once seated in a chair provided by the lady worker, she begins showing him the available land options, advising him to carefully consider his choice. However, Yang calmly interrupts, explaining that there's no need to go through the options. Instead, he states that he will outline his specific requirements, and she should then find the land that best fits them. His confident demeanor leaves the lady worker even more impressed. Yang begins to outline his requirements for the land. It needs to be close to both mountains and water to ensure a reliable water source, have convenient access to transportation, and include large buildings already constructed on it. The lady worker pauses, thinking carefully before responding. However, before she can speak, the real estate manager interrupts, suggesting a piece of land in the East District that fits Yang's needs. Surprised, the lady worker questions his suggestion, pointing out that the East District still has unfinished factory projects and that they cannot sell such land to clients. The real estate manager, now visibly frustrated, snaps back, claiming that Yang's demands are outrageous. He accuses Yang of not being serious about purchasing an expensive piece of land and instead just trying to cause trouble for them. Zhang is surprised to hear that there is indeed a piece of land that fits his exact requirements. He turns to the lady worker for confirmation. She nods, explaining that while the location matches his needs, there are still unfinished factory projects on the land because the construction team leader ran off, leaving the work incomplete. Zhang considers this and thinks to himself that the location is perfect. It checks all his boxes. He envisions fortifying the area with barbed wire, making it easy to defend, and realizes that the unfinished factories could actually save him a lot of money. Without hesitation, Yong tells the lady worker that he will take the land and asks to make a contract immediately so he can proceed with the payment right away. The lady worker takes the papers back from Yong, her tone now apprehensive as she apologizes for offering such a property. After listening to Zhang's intentions, she is visibly shocked and asks him if he truly plans to buy land with unfinished projects. Zhang confidently confirms his decision, adding with a smirk, "Someone's waiting to eat some fresh poop later, so let's hurry with the contract and down payment." The real estate manager, now drenched in cold sweat, nervously watches the process unfold. A short while later, the manager stands dumbfounded, holding a receipt in his trembling hands. "This is impossible," he mutters, staring at the $300,000 down payment. He continues, bewildered, "How can someone buy such expensive land with unfinished projects on it?" Zhang, unbothered, calmly explains to the still-shocked real estate manager, "I've made the down payment. Now it's your turn to perform in front of the camera. You should at least enjoy it." Without further words, Zhang, having had enough, turns and walks away, leaving the manager in disbelief. As other customers surround the real estate manager, they excitedly tell him they've turned on the live stream and urge him to hurry up. One customer, smirking, adds, "My stomach isn't feeling great, but I promise it'll be fresh." Yong, walking away, thinks to himself that he spent all the money he saved for the bride price on buying that piece of land, but now he needs to figure out how to get more money to stockpile supplies for the impending apocalypse. As Yong ponders his next steps, a fat man strolls past him, briefly wondering if that was indeed Yong. Shrugging it off, he continues on his way until he arrives at the commotion, only to be shocked by the sight of the real estate manager being forced to eat poop. The real estate manager, in a state of horror and disbelief, protests, "I don't want to eat this!" But his cries are ignored as the customers continue stuffing the mess into his mouth. The fat man, now furious, yells, "What the hell are you guys doing?" We then shift to the evil woman, who is carefully working on her nails when she receives a call from the fat man. She answers cheerfully, a sking if he remembers her, but the fat man wastes no time. "Did you know Zhang went to the real estate company to buy an expensive piece of land?" he cuts in. The evil woman, irritated, scoffs and asks how a broke loser like Zhang could afford something so costly. The fat man explains, "He made a $300,000 down payment, probably used the bride. Money." Hearing this, the evil woman's frustration turns to rage. "How could he use my money?" she fumes. The fat man, trying to calm her, tells her to keep her cool and figure out what Zhang is up to. She sneers, vowing to expose Zhang online for using her money without permission. We then return to Zhang, who's lost in thought. He reflects on how building a fortress and stocking supplies for the upcoming apocalypse will require a huge sum of money. Feeling the pressure, he worries, "How am I going to get that much when I'm completely broke?" Suddenly, there's a loud bang on the door, startling Zhang. It turns out to be the evil woman, Qi Jing, along with her friend. Zhang, confused, asks, "What are you doing here?" But Qi Jing cuts him off immediately, accusing him of spending her money behind her back. Still baffled, Yong responds, "What do you mean?" Qi Jing, with a smug expression, claims to know everything, including how he used her bride money to buy a piece of land. "Since it was my money, that land belongs to me now," she declares, trying to sound authoritative. Zhang's patience wears thin and he asks, "Have you lost your mind?" Growing angry, he grabs a stack of cash and slaps it into her face. "I have plenty of money," he says coldly, watching as disbelief takes over Qi Jing's face. He then lays it out for her, stating firmly that he'll never give her anything. "You must think I'm dumb, not knowing you've been having an affair with that fat man for a long time." Qi Jing's expression shifts, and sweat begins to form on her brow, panic setting in as she wonders how Zhang found out about her affair. Before she can respond, her friend tries to intervene, saying, "This is just a misunderstanding between a couple. Let's take it easy." Zhang doesn't even let her finish. "There's no misunderstanding," he says flatly. "A cheating woman like her is not my girlfriend." With finality, he adds, "Go back to the fat man where you belong." Irritated by their presence, Zhang slams the door in their faces, leaving them standing outside in shock. Left outside, the evil woman, Qi Jing, is deep in thought, wondering how Zhang discovered her affair, given how discreet she and the fat man were when booking hotel rooms. As she and her friend turn to leave, Her friend stops and confronts her, asking if what Yong said about the affair was true and why she didn't mention it before confronting him. Flustered, Chi-Jing deflects, saying, "We only booked a room a few times." Her friend, visibly concerned, suggests they should regroup and come up with a plan to handle Zhong, as the situation is spiraling out of control. Chi-Jing agrees, acknowledging that it's their only option for now. However, her friend secretly thinks to herself, "Since Chi-Jing messed up with Zhong, this is my chance to claim him for myself. We may be good sisters, but I'm not holding back anymore." We then shift back to the construction site where Yong has purchased his land. Zhong is speaking with a middle-aged construction manager, asking how long the renovations will take to complete. The middle-aged man, clearly puzzled by the urgency, inquires, "What kind of force have you offended to need such extensive renovations?" Yong brushes off the question, stating flatly, "You don't need to know the details." Asking too many questions won't help. He then demands to know how much it will cost to complete the work within a month. The middle-aged man, shocked by the tight deadline, tries to explain that completing the job in a month is nearly impossible. However, before he can finish, Yong interrupts. "If you can't do it, I'll find someone who can." Reluctantly, the man agrees to take on the project, but clarifies that the issue isn't the timeline. It's the cost. Yong, raising an eyebrow, asks, "How much are we talking about?" The construction manager explains that because the work needs to be rushed and more laborers will be needed, the cost will be significant. Yong, surprised, presses, "Will $20 million be enough?" The man nods, confirming that it will cover the job, and adds that a $5 million deposit will be required before they can start. Yong, unfazed, assures the man that he'll transfer the money within the week and instructs them to get started immediately. "Don't worry about the payment," Yong adds coldly. "If I don't pay the deposit, the land will be yours. But trust me, that won't happen." Acknowledging Yong's terms, the middle-aged man agrees and hurries off to begin preparations. Suddenly, the friend of the evil woman, still reeling from the earlier confrontation, calls out to Yong. He turns around, puzzled, and sees her clinging to his arm with an innocent look on her face. She gazes up at him and asks sweetly, "What are you doing here?" Her seemingly innocent demeanor contrasts sharply with the earlier hostility, leaving Zhong momentarily bewildered. He watches her, unsure whether to trust her intentions or see through her facade. The friend stood there, confused and frustrated, asking herself what was going on. Normally, just brushing Yong's hand would have made him blush and his heart race. But today he seemed completely irritated by her presence. Even after deliberately caressing his hands, he remained unresponsive, which left her feeling both angry and nervous. As she seethed, Yong had already moved on, focused on the task at hand. He spoke with the construction workers, giving them clear orders to expand the gates of his newly acquired land. His attention was fully on his future plans, and he treated her attempts to get his attention as nothing more than a nuisance. The friend called out to him once more, but he ignored her entirely, treating her like garbage. Since his breakup with Chi-Jing, the crazy woman, the friend saw this moment as a golden opportunity. She believed that if she could win Zhong over, the land and everything he was building would be hers. Gripping her hands tightly in desperation, she thought hard about how to turn the situation in her favor. She couldn't afford to let this chance slip away. While Zhong was focused on his construction plans, her mind was racing, scheming for a way to claim him and his land for herself. Suddenly, Yong heard loud bangs at his door, accompanied by a voice shouting for him to open it. As he approached, he recognized the voice. It was his downstairs neighbor, Grandpa Lee, an old, troublesome man. Lee, who owned the first and second floors of the building, had always been a nuisance, constantly trying to buy Zhong's third-floor apartment. Yong recalled the countless times Lee had caused trouble, from splashing paint on his door to dumping garbage and even placing funeral wreaths outside. Sighing, he grabbed the door handle and opened it to face the old man. Immediately, Grandpa Lee accused Zhong of going clubbing the previous night. Zhong yelled back, asking if Lee was done with his ridiculous accusations, adding that he had gone to bed before 10 p.m., so there was no way he could have been out clubbing. Lee stubbornly insisted that he heard something, but Yong cut him off, fed up with the old man's antics. Annoyed by Lee's constant pestering about the house, Yong said he was willing to sell it. Lee, stunned by the sudden offer, asked if Yong was serious. Yong, staring down at the monkey-faced old man, replied that he was but on one condition. He explained that his new house wouldn't be ready for another 6 months, so he needed to stay in the current one until then. He demanded that Lee pay $5 million for the house up front, which would allow him to clear his loan. As Lee tried to respond, Jong cut him off again, warning that if Lee didn't agree, he could forget the deal. Jong began slowly closing the door, but Lee pushed it open and nervously suggested they sign a contract to avoid any regrets. With a deeply irritated look, Jong assured him that the contract wouldn't be a problem. Knowing the apocalypse was only a month away, Jong smirked to himself, realizing he had just swindled the old man. Closing the door, he cursed Lee out, muttering to himself, "Just stay in his house and wait to meet your death." Jong scrolled through his phone, tallying the old man's $5 million along with his $3 million loan, which added up to $8 million in total. The system popped up, confirming that he had completed the first task, owning a piece of land. With that, Jong claimed the system's reward. The next day, Jong ventured into the city to complete his second task, gathering a year's worth of supplies. He breezed through the shopping mall, picking up various items that could prove useful during the upcoming apocalypse. People around him watched in confusion, some whispering that he was crazy. Others mocked him, calling him a foolish boy and warning each other to avoid him. They couldn't understand why he was hoarding so many supplies, and a few even labeled him a pathetic idiot for believing in doomsday rumors. Unfazed by their insults, Jong continued his mission, fully aware of what was coming. After filling numerous carts with supplies that would last him a full year, the system confirmed that he had completed the task, rewarding him with 10 points. As Jong browsed through the system store, he thought about how enhancing his attributes could prove invaluable during the apocalypse, but he was too broke for that. The protagonist's supply box seemed like the best investment with his 10 points. With a determined expression, Jong convinced himself to go for the supply box to expand his advantage as quickly as possible. He bought the box, and his 10 points were instantly deducted. When the supply box appeared, it had an infinity symbol on top and question marks surrounding its body. As the box unlocked, system information popped up, revealing that he had received a Level 1 space ring. The ring had a massive spatial capacity of 500 cubic meters, and, most importantly, time within the space was static. Jong immediately recognized the potential of the ring, especially for storing fresh food that would never spoil inside it. Overjoyed, he planned to fill the space with valuable items, knowing his first purchase from the system had to be a premium item. He was particularly relieved by the time-stopping feature, as it meant he wouldn't have to worry about food going bad, a task he was completely useless at managing in the kitchen. Yang told him to return all the items he had placed in his cart or face consequences, but before Yang could finish, Jong cut him off, mocking him for still bullying weaker people and being spineless in front of anyone stronger. He then sarcastically asked, "Is this how Hina Shopping Mart treats its customers?" Yang thought Jong was crazy for actually claiming he was going to purchase all those items. He scoffed and told Jong to pay for them immediately, or else he would be rough-handled by the Quards. An hour later, after all of Jong's items were scanned, the cashier printed out the total. Yang, now visibly irritated, was told the final price by the cashier and angrily handed the payment terminal to Jong. He yelled at him to pay immediately, expecting that Jong wouldn't be able to follow through. With a spark of confidence in his eyes, Jong swiped his card as if he were in a battle. The transfer was successful, and the cashier confirmed the payment. However, Yang didn't look too happy about that. As he walked away with his guards, clearly annoyed by Jong's unexpected ability to pay for everything, Jong called out to Yang, who was already fuming, and Yang turned back, demanding to know what Jong wanted. With a calm but firm tone, Jong told him to apologize for his rude behavior or else he'd return every single item he had just bought. The store manager, feeling humiliated, snapped at Jong, warning him not to push his luck. However, before Yang could continue, other customers in the store intervened. They urged him to apologize, saying it wasn't a big deal, and if he didn't, they wouldn't let the matter drop. One customer even started recording the scene, hinting that Yang might soon become an infamous online sensation if he didn't comply. Jong repeated his demand for an apology, and this time Yang, with no other option, bowed like a submissive servant and apologized. Jong patted Yang on the head, advising him not to be so reckless in the future and to leave room for others. Yang, looking utterly defeated, couldn't retaliate for fear of further trouble. Curious about Jong's purchases, Yang asked what he was planning. Jong revealed he was preparing for a major venture. Yang noted that the supermarket's inventory wouldn't be sufficient and suggested Jong needed to find a wholesaler. Jong turned back and asked Yang if he knew any wholesalers given his store job. Yang mentioned Shang, the bully who had previously extorted Zhong in school. Yang quickly called Shang, informing him of a big client. Disappointed that Yang was still under Shang's thumb, Zhong wondered how much under-the-table income they might have made at the supermarket. Zhong and Yang then headed to a warehouse, where a sleek, aggressive car nearly ran Yang over. Zhong was infuriated by the driver's arrogance. The driver, Shang, stepped out of the car, puffing cigarette smoke into the air with an air of superiority. Yang introduced Shang to Zhong, asking if he remembered him from their high school days. Shang, with smoke clouding his ears, made Yang repeat himself before finally acknowledging Zhong. He referred to Zhong as the guy with a bit of a backbone, all while blowing a puff of smoke in Zhong's direction. Shang tugged at Yang's hoodie drawstring, sneering that it was a fake designer brand. He complained about people pretending to be rich. Zhong responded that he wasn't sure if it was a designer brand. He had just bought it from a random store. Shang grabbed Yang by the head and berated him for bringing such a worthless client. He complained that Zhong's presence was a waste of his time and gave Yang a swift kick in the butt. Yang tried to argue that Zhong was a significant client, but Shang dismissed his claims, asserting that he could judge who was truly wealthy based on his many years in the business. Zhong added, "It seems like my aura isn't working. I'm not even able to intimidate an illiterate who looks down on people." Shang, however, focused on being called illiterate, ignoring the critique about his attitude. He grabbed Zhong by the collar and demanded he repeat what he'd said. Zhong remained unfazed and reiterated his insult about Shang, looking down on people. Zhong took it as confirmation that Shang didn't mind being called out for his disdain toward others. Yang attempted to de-escalate the situation, explaining that Shang's biggest issue was being called illiterate because, in reality, he was one and despised the label. Shang, already fuming, tossed Yang aside like trash and told him to be quiet. He then turned his ire towards Zhong, threatening that he wouldn't leave until Zhong committed to buying a truckload of goods. Zhong pulled out his phone and demanded Shang show him the payment account. Moments later, Zhong transferred $1 million, leaving Shang visibly shocked by the hefty sum. Yang made it clear that he wasn't there for any other reason. He said he intended to buy $5 million worth of goods and instructed Shang to load up the truck with the rest, promising to pay the balance once everything was prepared. Shang asked Yang what kind of goods he wanted, and Yang replied that he needed rice, salt, and basically anything that was edible or drinkable. He wanted it all. With a sly smile, Shang told Yang to follow him. Unbeknownst to Yang, Shang planned to offload a batch of nearly expired food. As they entered the warehouse filled with barrels and crates of various supplies, Shang offered a 10% discount if Zhong took the whole batch. He was determined to get rid of the goods by any means necessary. Zhong replied that his decision would depend on the quality. As he examined a crate, picking up a brown bag, he noted that everything was nearly expired, except for the outermost layer. Zhong called Shang a shrewd man for trying to set him up. Shang was surprised by Yang's keen observation and, caught between a rock and a hard place, offered a 50% discount. Yang dismissed the discount, stating that he was only interested in buying the best quality goods with his $5 million. He added that he had other plans for the expired items. Shang wondered about Zhong's intentions, but Zhong assured him he'd buy the nearly expired goods at the 50% discount, with payment to arrive a month later. When Shang expressed concern about what would happen if the goods expired before payment, Yang promised he would mortgage his house to cover it. Intrigued yet unsettled, Shang asked Zhong about his channel. Zhong replied that the channel was himself, and that even expired goods would be worth a fortune soon. With a cold sweat forming, Shang looked increasingly nervous as he asked Zhong for clarification. Zhong told him to stop asking questions and just deliver the goods, promising to send the address later. Zhong received a call asking if he was selling his second-hand house. As he stepped away to take the call, he told Shang to handle the food situation while he took care of other matters. Yang, who had been a persistent annoyance, questioned Shang about the potential scam, but Shang was more concerned about how Zhong was managing so well, despite his family's lack of notable resources. Returning home, Zhong was greeted by Grandpa Li, who handed him a bag of money as a deposit for the house. The old man agreed to Zhong's condition of vacating the house in 3 months and asked to sign the contract right away. Zhong noted the old man hadn't even inspected the house before making the deposit and inquired about his urgency. Lee, with a distressed look, explained that his granddaughter needed to transfer schools urgently, and Yong's house was the only one available in the area. He begged Yong not to back out of the deal. Yong called out the old man's honesty and questioned if he wasn't worried about Yong increasing the price now that he knew the urgency. Lee was visibly shocked and appeared as though he might have a heart attack. He admitted that buying the house would deplete their entire savings, but reassured Yong that he wasn't going to back out. After signing the contract, Lee was relieved that his granddaughter wouldn't end up homeless. He bowed deeply in gratitude before leaving, allowing Yong to focus on his other pressing matters. As Grandpa Lee left, Yong reflected on how the old man's kindness and honesty might spell his doom during the apocalypse. He quickly stopped Lee for a moment and asked him to provide the address of his current residence. The next day, Yong visited the construction site to check on the progress of his new place. Upon arrival, the construction manager requested the second batch of funds, sounding almost greedy. Yong assured him he would transfer the money soon. The manager showed Yong around the site, revealing that the building was about 70 to 80% complete. They stood beneath the reinforced doors and walls, with the manager assuring Yong of their safety. Curious about the warehouse, Yong learned it had been cleaned up and was ready for use. With this good news, Yong called Shang with a pleased expression and instructed him to deliver the goods. Moments later, workers began filling the warehouse with boxes of supplies. The workers, motivated by the high wages they were receiving, eagerly went about their tasks. They discussed how the place resembled a shelter and remarked on how the wealthy seemed to truly value their lives. Yong directed the workers to ensure that the perishable goods were stored separately. As the day ended and the underpaid interns began to leave the warehouse, Yong stood proudly in front of his towering stack of supplies. He was satisfied to have completed the task of acquiring 10 years' worth of provisions. The system confirmed his success, awarding him 20 points. While browsing the system store, Yong noticed a new item, a box that would grant him an awakening ability. Excited by the prospect of gaining an advantage before the apocalypse hit, Yong quickly purchased the box. It granted him the ability known as the Mind's Eye, which would help him detect if others were hostile or had harmful intentions. Yong was thrilled, recognizing that this ability would be incredibly useful in the early days of the apocalypse. With it, he could easily distinguish friends from foes and handle situations accordingly. After that, the system popped up Yong's next mission, to arm himself. Yong's face lit up with a mischievous grin as he said, "That's exactly what I had in mind." It was nighttime at the market, alive with the hustle and bustle of vendors and customers. The streets were filled with people searching for rare items, unaware of the looming apocalypse. Yong walked through the crowded market, overhearing snippets of conversations. Customers were debating the authenticity of various items, while vendors wore stern expressions, trying to maintain their composure amid constant questions. Yong's attention was drawn to a particularly loud and frustrating scene. A customer was trying to haggle an item priced at $2,000 down to just $300. The vendor, visibly frustrated, couldn't believe the audacity of such a low offer. When Yong looked closer, he recognized the persistent and greedy customer Li Shuking, a rotund and notoriously difficult negotiator. Li Shuking threatened to walk away if the vendor didn't agree to his absurdly low price. The vendor, struggling to keep his cool and avoid a physical altercation, reluctantly agreed to the deal just to end the confrontation. One of the passers-by glanced at the vendor as if he were a total novice, lacking the backbone to stand up for himself. Yong wondered why Li Shuking was purchasing fake bracelets on the black market, especially for someone who loves to boast. Yong thought Li Shuking was nothing more than a cheapskate and a foolish one at that. He called his wild ex-girlfriend Chi Jing a fool for falling for a scam like Li Shuking. The way Yong stared at Shuking made it clear that he was irritated just by his presence. Yong returned to browsing and soon spotted a display of fine swords and machetes. Each blade looked sharp enough to take off someone's head with ease. But he wasn't the only one eyeing the blades with such intensity. Other passers-by seemed just as drawn to the art of slicing and dicing. Yong grinned, pleased that he had found what he was looking for. He approached the vendor and began inspecting the blades, handling one as if he actually had some experience as a swordsman, though his clumsy grip suggested otherwise. Yong asked the vendor if he had any hard stuff, though it was pretty clear he wasn't referring to sausages anyway. The vendor, not wanting to waste time on someone like Yong, casually pointed to a knife sharpener and told him to get to work if he was looking for something hard. He also suggested that Yong could buy a baton if sharpening a blade seemed too much trouble. Yong, with a scowl on his face, insisted that it still wasn't hard enough and that he needed something tougher. The conversation was definitely starting to feel a little sketchy at this point. The vendor, now irritated by Yong's persistence, questioned whether he was there just to stir up trouble. Dressed in a camouflage jacket, the vendor looked like a seasoned veteran, someone who could easily deal with a nuisance like Yong. But his expression shifted when his phone buzzed with a credit alert. Yong had transferred a substantial amount of money. The vendor, shocked by how much this scruffy-looking kid had sent, couldn't believe his eyes. Yong, now grinning, made it clear that he was the one behind the transfer and told the vendor to relax. He was dead serious about getting something hard to satisfy his needs. I hope you understand what I mean. The vendor, realizing Yong wasn't backing down, instructed his assistant Zhang to watch the stall. He led Yong to a more private spot, explaining that talking outside was inconvenient. Rather than taking him to a warehouse, they arrived at what seemed like an ordinary home, though the vendor was clearly serious about giving Yong what he wanted. Inside, the vendor showcased a variety of homemade guns, basic enough to kill small animals like chickens, and all at dirt-cheap prices. The ammo and gunpowder were just as affordable. But Yong wasn't impressed. Frustrated, the vendor began to think Yong might just be a troublesome crackhead, judging by the exasperated look on his face. Trying to salvage the sale, he presented a replica revolver, which performed almost as well as a real service handgun. Yet, it was still ridiculously cheap. It was clear the vendor was pushing cheap items to pocket a hefty profit. Yong, now furious, glared down at the vendor and declared that it still wasn't good enough. Yong had already paid the vendor a hefty sum, so being offered cheap junk only irritated him further. He bluntly told the vendor that the 200,000 sent was just a prepayment. The vendor, now convinced this kid had completely lost it, stared at Yong in disbelief. But Yong, with a cold, unwavering expression, revealed that he was actually purchasing weapons worth 2 million. The vendor couldn't help but wonder what kind of apocalypse this apparent loser was gearing up for. Out of sheer curiosity and maybe a bit of fear for his own life, the vendor nervously asked Yong what he did for a living. After all, no normal person would be buying that much heavy weaponry, and the vendor definitely didn't want to get on his bad side. Yong brushed off the vendor's question, saying that his subordinates usually handled minor details and that he didn't need to answer any more inquiries. The vendor, sensing Yong's seriousness, took precautions by locking the doors and closing the windows to ensure privacy. Thankfully, Yong wasn't subjected to any unwelcome treatment. The vendor then assured Yong that he had come to the right place. The vendor whispered to Yong, "I can handle this." He asked Yong to write a list of the items he needed and promised to give him an address. Yong was instructed to visit the location at midnight the day after tomorrow, drive there, and complete the transaction. As Yong left the building, he heard the annoying voice of the fat fool, Shuking, calling his name. Just the sound of that idiot's voice made Yong look like he was about to be sick. Shuking was taken aback to see Yong at the black market and remarked that this must explain Yong's recent lavish spending. He accused Yong of being a foolish degenerate who clearly wanted all the money for himself. Shuking also criticized Yong for ignoring Qi-Jing and speculated that Yong's family must have had some valuable heirlooms. He even suggested, with a mocking tone, that Yong might be there to sell off his inheritance and implied that Yong had been watching too many marketing accounts lately. Yong wasn't bothered by Shuking's degrading comments. Instead, he saw it as an opportunity to test his mental ability. He activated it, and a blue flame surrounded his eye. This allowed him to see various icons above the heads of the vendor and Shuking. The icon above the vendor's head looked friendly, while Shuking's clearly marked him as an enemy. Yong was pleased that his ability was functioning as expected. Turning back to Shuking, Yong mocked him, suggesting he had tricked Jing by buying fake and second-hand goods just to impress her. Yong dismissed Jing as merely being worth the fake items. Shuking, infuriated, didn't deny being a broke loser who had to buy cheap items to impress a girl. The vendor, curious, asked if Yong and Shuking knew each other. Yong explained that Shuking was an enemy. Grateful for the money he'd received, the vendor began to act like Yong's loyal lackey, promising to deal with Shuking while Yong handled other matters. As Shuking's inept friends came out to join the drama, Yong instructed the vendor not to kill Shuking. As he still had plans for him, Shuking was already trembling like a chihuahua as the goons approached him. He tried to act tough, but his bravado was futile. When the arms dealer brandished a baton, Shuking attempted to negotiate, but his proud facade crumbled, and he probably ended up wetting himself. The arms dealer and his goons gave Shuking a severe beating, leaving him defeated and lying on the floor. Shuking swore to get revenge on Zhong for the humiliation. 2 days later, in the dead of night, Zhong received his new guns, delivered by truck to his warehouse. With his new arsenal, his task was complete, and he was rewarded with 10 points by the system as a bonus. Additionally, he received 2 physical enhancement syringes instead of potions. It was clear the system was pushing him to use these substances, essentially forcing him to take drugs. Zhong noticed that the potion's effects were as powerful as those from the store. He raised one hand and prepared to inject the syringe into his body. As he did, he gritted his teeth in pain, and his eyes turned completely white. It was hard to tell whether he was experiencing the euphoric high of a junkie getting their fix, or if he was on the verge of collapsing. Fortunately, Zhong wasn't about to let his second chance at life go to waste. He knew that the average adult male had a strength rating of 5, but with the additional 2 points from the potion, he achieved a 40% increase in strength. He clenched his fists, testing his newfound power, though he still appeared like the same old ineffective loser. Despite the boost, he felt it wasn't enough. Zhong opened the system store and reviewed the remaining items. He decided to take full advantage by purchasing an extra physical enhancement potion. As he injected himself, he winced like a child getting an unwelcome touch. The additional potion brought his total to 8 points, giving him 60% more strength than the average person. With his enhanced power, all that was left was to test it. He glanced around and noticed some bags of cement and rods on the floor. Unsure about his new abilities, he picked up one of the rods and decided to put his strength to the test. Channeling his inner Bruce Lee, he kicked the rod with force, bending it and sending it crashing into the wall, which cracked under the impact. Feeling the surge of his new strength, Zhong reveled in his newfound power, feeling like a formidable force that shouldn't be underestimated. Confident in his newfound strength, Zhong was sure he'd be able to handle early-stage zombies with ease when they appeared. Afterward, he decided to store the guns in his space ring to save on physical space. The weapon crate shrank and was drawn into the ring as if it were being pulled into a black hole. With the apocalypse set to begin the day after tomorrow, Zhong was focused on ensuring he had everything in order. One memory that kept flashing through his mind was of Grandpa telling him about his granddaughter and their need for Zhong's house as a refuge. Despite his frustrations with human treachery, Zhong felt a twinge of guilt that he couldn't completely ignore the old man's plight. Deciding to act on it, Zhong resolved to send some essential supplies for the apocalypse to Grandpa. He saw it as a form of repayment for the old man's financial support in his own apocalyptic plans. Ultimately, though, it would be up to the old fool to survive or become just another tombstone. The next day, a black car pulled into what seemed like a forgotten, rundown neighborhood. Zhong stepped out, remarking that anyone trying to find this filthy slum would definitely need a GPS. He made his way to the top floor where Granda Lee was staying to deliver the apocalypse supplies. From the state of things, it was clear that the old man was struggling, living in such a decrepit place. Zhong scoffed, thinking Granda must have a screw loose to be living in such cheap conditions. Before knocking on the door, Zhong remembered to take the supplies out of his space ring, sparing himself from having to explain the ring's powers to the old man. With everything ready, he approached the door, avoiding any unnecessary conversations. After setting out all the boxes, Zhong knocked on the door. Granda Lee hobbled over with his rickety legs, muttering about paying his rent by next Monday, unaware of who he was speaking to at first. It was clear the old man didn't have many functioning brain cells left. However, a few moments later, his eyes widened in recognition as he realized it was Zhong standing before him. Lee was even more surprised to see the massive number of boxes surrounding Zhong. It was as if his eyes suddenly sharpened, and he asked Zhong what they were for. Zhong brushed off the question, saying he'd explain later, and asked the old man to help move the boxes inside. They needed to be discreet so the nosy neighbors wouldn't suspect anything illegal. However, Zhong ended up doing most of the heavy lifting, as Lee wasn't exactly up for the task. The old man, though good-natured, was too frail to contribute much. He sighed, wishing he had the stamina of young folks like Zhong, who could haul loads without breaking a sweat. Watching Lee try to move just one box nearly made it seem like he was about to keel over. Once they were done moving the boxes, Zhang checked the room and the door to ensure they were sturdy enough. While inspecting, he told Li to listen carefully to what he was about to say. Given Li's fading memory and senses, expecting the old man to hear and remember everything clearly was probably asking too much. Still, Yang told him to use the supplies wisely, as they would last him for half a year. As Li rambled about keeping the supplies in his room because they would be moving in soon, Yang barely paid attention. He had given the old man what he needed if Li wanted to keep being foolish. It wasn't Yang's concern. Then, something caught Yang's eye. A picture of Granda Li with a stunning brown-haired young woman. Instantly, he recognized her as Shanin, someone he had been involved with in his previous life. Yang was shocked to realize that this beautiful girl was the old man's granddaughter. Curious, Yang asked if her name was Ming Shanin. Li, surprised that Zhang knew her name, asked how he knew about her since he had never mentioned her before. Yang's expression suddenly became cold and serious as he asked Li where Shanin was. Now that the girl he had once been close to was part of the picture, there was no way he could abandon her or her grandfather. Li explained that Shanin was still studying in their hometown, but once they moved into Zhang's house, she would join them. A flashback played in Zhang's mind, showing him and Shanin sitting together while she tearfully complained, feeling guilty for causing trouble for her grandfather. Yang had a sad look on his face as he recalled those moments. He remembered that in his past life, Shanin had told him how her grandfather risked his life to rescue her from a high school that had been overrun. Though he saved her, the old man lost his life afterward. With that painful memory, Yang made a vow to ensure the past wouldn't repeat itself. He was determined to survive this time, and, in his mind, to build a future with Shanin, which included starting a family. Zhang told Grandpa Li that moving houses was no longer an option, leaving the old man with a shocked expression. Li, clearly bewildered, probably thought Yang had lost his mind. He pleaded with Yang to reconsider, thinking the boy had changed his decision. But Yang responded gravely, explaining that the world was about to fall into chaos the next day, plunging humanity into immense suffering. In the face of such a catastrophe, concerns about houses or Shanin's school wouldn't matter anymore. Li, utterly confused, stared at Yang as if he were the one whose mind was slipping. He couldn't grasp the seriousness of what Yang was saying and assumed the boy was either mentally disturbed or just talking nonsense. Yang, growing frustrated, told Li they needed to go to Shanin's school to pick her up, promising to arrange a new place for them. But Li, filled with fear and confusion, lashed out, saying Zhang sounded like a lunatic, and he had no idea what he was talking about. This only added to Zhang's frustration. He needed to find a way to explain the situation clearly, but time was running out, and it was clear the old man was too set in his ways to understand. Yang wore a deeply worried expression as he tried to figure out how to get through to Grandpa Li. He began by explaining the concept of hunger, something he figured the old man, having lived in modest conditions, would be familiar with. Yang described the misery and desperation people would face in the famine era, but Grandpa Li remained incredulous. He couldn't understand how such devastation could strike their peaceful, prosperous world. It seemed unimaginable to him. Realizing there was no way to convince the old man through words alone, Yang resorted to action. He pulled out his space ring and, with a wave, sucked all the supplies back into the spatial dimension. Grandpa Li's eyes widened in fear, his mind racing as the items disappeared in an instant. Completely baffled, he stammered, asking where everything had gone, even suspecting dark magic might be at play. Yang's demeanor grew more serious, and an intimidating aura surrounded him. In a forceful tone, he declared to the old man that he possessed superpowers and could see the future. There was no time for disbelief anymore. Yang needed Li to understand the urgency of what was coming. Yang, his voice firm and unwavering, declared that he wanted to survive, and more importantly, he wanted Shanin to survive as well. From that moment on, he made it clear that everything would be done according to his decisions, leaving Grandpa Li with no room to argue or defy him. His tone was authoritative, and he demanded to know where Shanin's school was, stressing that there was almost no time left. The urgency in his words was undeniable, and it was clear that Yang had taken full control of the situation. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. Yong and Grandpa Lee left the house and got into the car, with Lee still eyeing Yong like he was some sort of crazed villain. As they sped through the streets, they quickly reached the school. Yong asked the old man if he knew which class and dormitory Shannon was in, and to his relief, Lee actually did. For once, Lee was proving useful. Yong couldn't imagine what he might have done if the old man had been clueless. With time running out, they hurried through the school, racing to find Shannon. Meanwhile, in the middle of the campus, a group of delinquents were harassing a girl, Shannon herself. She was being bullied and beaten by some illiterate girls, all because they were jealous that a guy liked her. Instead of working on their own charm to win his attention, they decided to take their frustration out on her. Shannon, bruised and beaten, tried to explain to the bullies that the guy, Jiang Xin, was the one who liked her, and it was completely one-sided. Unfortunately, the bullies were too dense to understand and thought she was just making excuses. They kicked her and pulled her hair to make up for their own low self-esteem, refusing to believe that Zia Chang was the one desperately chasing after her. Shannon, oddly enough, made some happy noises as her hair was yanked, which probably only fueled their cruel behavior. As things got worse, a voice suddenly called out, asking the bullies what they were doing. Unfazed, the girls barely reacted. But to Shannon's surprise, it was none other than Zhong and her grandfather, who had come to her rescue. One of the bullies recognized Lee and mocked him as Shannon's useless grandfather. Shannon, taken aback, asked why he was at her school instead of showing immediate gratitude for their intervention. Her grandfather, ignoring the questions, yelled at the bullies to let go of his granddaughter. Yong, standing behind Lee, looked like he was itching to teach the bullies a harsh lesson. Meanwhile, some of the dumb-looking guys approached Lee, wielding knives and bats. They warned the old man to stay out of their business, claiming he was meddling in affairs meant for the young. Their blonde-haired leader walked up, brandishing his knife, but Lee stood his ground. In a surprising move, Grandpa Lee rushed at the guy with the knife, scolding him for being disrespectful and bullying his classmates. As they tussled, another thug swung a bat, aiming for Lee's neck, hoping to knock him out. Just in time, Zhong stepped in, catching the bat mid-swing, saving Lee from Al's potentially fatal blow. With a mocking tone, Zhong ridiculed the young thug for learning to be a delinquent at such a young age. The bullies, underestimating Yong because of his appearance, saw him as just another weakling and assumed he was Shannon's little brother. Yong, however, proved them wrong with a single powerful kick, sending one of the bullies flying like a rag doll. The display of strength startled the rest of them, making them realize Yong wasn't someone to mess with. They figured he must have had some training and decided to gang up on him. Despite being outnumbered, Yong wasn't fazed. Keeping his calm, serious expression, he swiftly dodged the first attack, ducking under a bat swung at him. Thanks to his enhanced strength, his reflexes were now lightning fast. He grabbed the attacker by the collar and slammed him into the ground with one hand, knocking him out cold. The final thug, armed with a dagger, tried his luck, but Yong effortlessly weaved through the attack and delivered a crushing kick, the guy to the floor, nearly putting him out for good. Once Yong had dealt with the boys, the girls began trembling in fear, anxiously asking what he was going to do with them. The girls were terrified, thinking Yong was about to do something far worse than what they had dished out. But they were wrong. Yong wasn't interested in them that way. As he walked toward them, he began smacking them around. One of the bullies, in shock, couldn't believe he dared to hit a woman. To Yong, though, she wasn't a woman, she was just an ugly gorilla who bullied others for fun. When the other girl got her hair pulled, she screamed at Yong to let go. In an instant, he pulled out a knife and pressed it against her neck. Her eyes filled with tears, and she shakily asked what he planned to do. With a swift motion, Yong brought the blade across her neck, leaving everyone stunned, including Shannon and the other bullies, who couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. But just when the tension peaked, it turned out Yong hadn't actually killed her. He'd only cut her hair. The girl collapsed to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably, devastated that her hair had been chopped off. To her, this was the worst possible fate. Furious, she screamed at Yong, cursing him for daring to cut her precious hair and swearing she'd never forgive him. Zhong gazed down at the girl with a chilling sense of superiority, as if he held complete power over her fate. "Long hair will only drag you down," he said, his voice cold and detached. She stared back at him, her anger blinding her to the meaning of his words. Without missing a beat, Zhang added, "You'll understand in a few days. Short hair might just save your life." His statement lingered in the air, ominous and cryptic, leaving her too enraged to comprehend the gravity of what he had just said. With the bullies dealt with, Zhang called for Shanine and her grandfather, telling them it was time to leave. Shanine, still confused, asked where they were going, but she got no clear answer. Moments later, they were all in Yong's car, driving away from the school. In the car, Shannon was shocked to hear that she wouldn't be attending school anymore. Her grandfather explained with a grave tone that a massive famine was coming, and because of that, staying in school was pointless. Their focus now had to be on survival. While Shannon tried to process what sounded like her grandfather's outlandish claims, Zhang smirked slyly as he drove. He was clearly satisfied, knowing he had secured someone he cared about, someone he wouldn't let slip through his grasp this time. Shannon, skeptical of her grandfather's words, turned to Lee and said he shouldn't be falling for scam calls, assuming that the old man had been tricked. Considering his age, she didn't think it was far-fetched. She argued with him, asking how much he had lost to the scam. Lee, flustered, tried to explain that he was telling the truth. The two continued bickering. Yong watched with amusement, feeling content just to have Shanine by his side again. He promised himself he wouldn't fail to protect her this time. Eventually, Zhang jumped into the conversation, telling Shanine that he was the one who had informed her grandfather about the impending famine and that it wasn't a scam. Shanine, surprised that he had spoken up, asked nervously who he was. Zhang introduced himself, saying she could call him Brother Yang. Shanine thanked him for dealing with the bullies earlier and teaching them a lesson. Zhang casually dismissed it, telling her not to worry about those fools, as they didn't have many days left in their lives. Confused, Shanine asked what he meant and if a famine was truly coming. Zhang explained that he had used the concept of famine to help her grandfather understand, given Lee's deteriorating mental state. Shanine, somewhat relieved, believed there couldn't be a famine in such peaceful times. But then Yang shattered her relief, telling her it wasn't a famine, it was an apocalypse that was coming. Now truly nervous, Shanine exclaimed, "Apocalypse?" as confusion and fear set in. Zhang, sensing the perfect moment, told Shanine to check the short video clips and news on her phone. He said that if nothing unexpected had happened yet, she would soon start noticing the signs. Shanine quickly pulled out her phone and scrolled through the latest updates. The first thing she saw was a news report about a man, supposedly rabid, biting people like a crazed animal. In the video, officers were struggling to restrain the wild zombie-like figure as he fought to break free. As she kept browsing, more disturbing reports came up. A strange smog was being talked about, with people mentioning how it had a peculiar, foul smell. The phone echoed with the terrified screams of people as more incidents of biting and chaos surfaced. Shanine's face turned pale with fear. She couldn't wrap her mind around the horror unfolding in front of her, thinking it had to be some kind of nightmare. Zhang, calm as ever, remarked that these were just the beginning signs of the apocalypse, exactly as he had expected. Despite all the overwhelming evidence in front of her, Shannon, still in shock, asked foolishly, "Is this really the apocalypse?" It was as if she couldn't fully grasp the gravity of what was happening right in front of her. The next day was set to mark the official beginning of the apocalypse, with a toxic smog spreading across several provinces, including Province B. This mysterious fog would soon infect all living creatures, and the chaos that Zhang had anticipated would begin to unravel across the world. Slowly but surely, a significant part of humanity would transform into grotesque, mindless zombies, and the world as they knew it would crumble. People would desperately try to flee, but their efforts would be in vain, as the relentless zombies would inevitably catch up, reducing them to mere meals, before turning their victims into more of the soulless creatures. Yang then stated, "You must have watched zombie movies as a kid, right? So, I'm assuming you have some idea about what a zombie is." Shannon, who still appeared dazed by the entire situation. The reality of it all was too overwhelming for her, and while she nodded slightly, it was clear that her mind struggled to connect the fictional zombies she grew up watching with the horrifying truth unfolding in front of her. While they were stuck in a traffic jam, Yang assured Shannon that she would come to believe everything in the coming weeks. The jam had everyone on edge, and Yang's patience was wearing thin. Grandpa Lee, worried about their situation, asked what they would do if zombies caught up with them while trapped in traffic. Yang said it wasn't urgent yet, though he started to seriously consider the possibility of an outbreak happening right there. As Yang was deep in thought, a reckless driver tried to cut in front of his car. Yang blocked him, then slammed the brakes, almost sending Grandpa Lee and Shanine flying through the windshield. Furious at the idiot driver trying to cut into the emergency lane without signaling, Yong's temper flared. He started driving aggressively, weaving like a stunt driver from Fast and Furious. The reckless driver pulled up beside him, yelling and cursing, but Yong ignored the nonsense. Lee, trying to calm the situation, suggested they let it go since the other driver seemed to be a rich and powerful person, but Yong was ready for any escalation. If the man stepped out to cause trouble, he had no problem beating him to a pulp. The traffic finally cleared after nearly an hour, but the reckless driver was still trying to cut ahead. Shanine warned Yong to be careful. By now, Yong was beyond enraged and ready to deal with the foolhardy Lee. As they engaged in a road rage battle, Lee pleaded with Yong not to stoop to such levels, especially with the apocalypse approaching. Yong dismissed the idea of being lenient, saying there was no need to hold back on someone so reckless. Yong finally managed to break free, forcing the reckless driver to nearly crash on the side of the road. The enraged man got out, shouting curses and calling the police, swearing he'd get back at Yong. He was clearly a spoiled rich kid used to throwing around his money and power, and he wasn't going to let this go without a fight.